Now, the timetable is the same as yesterday. We shall be closing this meeting at 4:30 or whenever we get to that stage, opening the link again at 5:20. And that's the point at which, if you're sending questions to chat, that's when you do it. And obviously, if you're using the local method of pencil and paper, you can do it at any time you like. So today, we're going to look at some of the main themes, or two of the main themes on the menorah page. Now, the first one, you're very familiar with this tablet now. This tablet is about the mother and about her son. And when we saw the holy, holy, holy pattern yesterday, in the top triangle is the orange that represents the Messiah, the Son of God, as the center lamp. And then in the two bottom triangles, left and right, there were the two leaves, and those are the geminated form of the shoot that is going to grow again from the tree of life. So this is a threefold depiction of the mother and her son. And we're going to look first of all at the son and some of what this tablet tells us about the Messiah. Now, I must emphasize some. One of the most frustrating things about putting this week together was having to discipline myself to leave out a lot of very exciting things, because I thought, if I include that, then I can't include this, and so forth. So there is a lot more about the Messiah on this page than it is possible to show you. There's also the problem that some of the Messiah patterns are very complicated indeed. And I think, you know, hot weather and so forth, you might well decide to switch off if you saw anything so forbidding, really. So what you know already about this tablet is that the three zones indicate heaven and the Holy of Holies and then the earth. That's very important because temple theology, which is what this is an expression of, is all about the relationships between the highest heaven and the Holy of Holies, which is obviously part of the temple, and the created order, which is the bottom line. Now, here, the quotations that I have shown you before, the menorah with its 6 branches, and the logos in the middle, making the 7th, and separating the others. Now, this idea of separation in creation is very, very important. It's something that takes place within the Holy of Holies. If you look at the account of the creation in Genesis chapter 1, the great emphasis is on the work of the sort of male side of the Creator in separating out. And separating out is very, very important. But there was another element in the creation, not emphasized in English exposition of the Old Testament, and certainly not in the translations of it. There was the other element, and that was the female element, and she held things together. And so you have the male who divides and separates, as Philo knew, and you have the female who holds all things together. And when we have looked briefly at that poem in Proverbs chapter 8, wisdom says that she was there in the beginning beside the Creator, and she was there as, and then there's that word that has about 6 meanings, amon, one way to pronounce it, either holding things together or nursing the creation, or acting as its foundation, all sorts of things. But there are the two processes in creation, making things distinct and keeping things distinct, and also holding them together. And that's very important. Now, where does this holding together figure occur in Genesis? We'll answer right at the beginning. When you have the Spirit fluttering over the waters, that is a feminine verb, merachefet. And so she is there hovering, holding all things together. And then, of course, there is the curious way that Origen, a great Christian biblical scholar, died in 253, so he's very early. Origen also read the first word of the Old Testament differently. Now, we usually translate it, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Origen knew a different way of putting vowels to those first letters of Genesis. And instead of in the beginning, he read it as by means of the net, bar reshet. By means of the net, God created heavens and earth, and the Spirit was fluttering over the waters. Now, Origen had a lot of contact with the Jews of his time when he was living in Caesarea. Where does he get this from? It's quite clear, bar reshet, by means of the net. And this picture of the net being associated with the Holy Spirit, the Orthodox Church, as I understand it, still keeps the image of the net of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. And that's where it comes from. So we have the separating, and then we have the holding together. And then we've had the 7 golden lampstands before, and we've had Hermas before, the glorious man, the Son of God, in the center of the 6 glorious angels. Now, patterns that intersect at the central lamp, and this will be very important when we're looking at the mother of the Messiah, because many of her titles intersect at that central lamp. Many of these describe the Messiah, and here they are flowing up into heaven. And we have Yahu, the older form of the name, that's following the red line up into heaven, and the blue line, my shepherd, the famous one. Now, Isaiah's servant song described the Messiah. And here you have the servant, following the red line for the servant, the Eveth. He goes up to the lower part of heaven, passing through the central lamp, and then he comes down again. And the blue line from the triangle, knowledge or stillness. Now, this is one of the words that has puzzled people who are translating Isaiah 53, because what does it actually mean? By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. This difficulty of understanding what they meant by these terms, how could it be that something which the servant knew, how could that somehow make other people be accounted righteous? Now, this can be interpreted in a rather immoral way, that somehow there was a way around divine punishment, and provided you did the right things and so forth, you could be accounted righteous even though you weren't. Well, that's not what this is about. The servant's knowledge is something that he acquires when he is in the Holy of Holies, because he sees with the eyes of eternity. He sees the view from outside the material world, which is what the Holy of Holies represents. And so the righteous one, my servant, makes many to be accounted righteous. He actually knows how to put things right. It is very, very important. And the biblical idea of righteousness is not tainted with the unfortunate English usage of self-righteousness. It's actually putting things right, getting things back into the state in which they are intended to be. Now, we can debate about what state we are intended to be in, but that's not something we can do today. Notice that the righteous one, my servant, maybe I should have put that with capital letters, the righteous one, his name exists in two forms. He can either be Sadiq, and that means someone who has been put right, or it can be Zadok. Zadok, someone who is in the process of putting people right. And that name exists in these two forms, someone who is being put right, someone who puts right. And I strongly suspect that the high priestly name Zadok, which is what this becomes in English, is not so much his name as his job description. And the role of Zadok, the high priest, was to ensure that people had the correct teaching about, how to keep the world right, and also had the way of making sure that people were kept, if you like, within that pattern. Anyway, you'll see there's quite a lot from Isaiah 53, and this is the famous servant song. Now, if we look, this is the same pattern as the last one, but I have added double lines because these show what happens when the servant gets up into heaven. So the red line, you have the servant, and then when he gets up into heaven and he comes back down again, you have the word for the white linen garment. And so the two letters from the dot up in heaven down to the left-hand side, that sloping red line, that says Bath, which is the white linen garment, either of a high priest, that's Leviticus 16, Leviticus 16 is the chapter about the Day of Atonement, or it's the white garment of an angel. And you find this in Ezekiel chapter 9, the angels who came to bring judgment on the city, and one of them goes through and marks the name on the foreheads of the faithful. But I give you those as two examples, the garment of a high priest, the garment of an angel, but in fact, they would not have distinguished those roles. Very, very important. Now, the blue line, where I have doubled it, what else does the high priest in his white linen bring down from heaven? Answer, he brings down either knowledge, or that word is also sometimes used to mean the power of speech. And one of the things that is said, one of the traditions about Adam, when he's created in the Garden of Eden and the Lord God breathes into him, he gives him the gift of speaking. It's very, very important. And there's a parody of this, of course, in the book of Revelation in chapter 12, where the beast can make the image speak. There's a lot of parodying of temple ritual in the book of Revelation. Absolutely fascinating. It's almost the answer book. Now, look what we have in the New Testament. The very end of Luke's gospel, until you are clothed with power from on high. Now, we read that verse so often, Ascension Day. Wait around in the city until you are clothed with power. Well, this is what happened to the high priest or the angel. He was clothed, and that's where the image comes from. And then what happens in the account of Pentecost? They were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak. That's the gift of the Spirit, is speaking. So now the Messiah, who is also the servant, symbolically offered himself on the Day of Atonement. Now, this is hugely, hugely important. It raises all sorts of controversies with that part of the Protestant spectrum which teaches ideas of penal substitution. The Day of Atonement is a ritual which was recognized as a parable or a foreshadowing of the realities of the New Testament. And the servant is offering himself but for practical reasons, he offers instead 2 goats. But the ritual was about self-offering. And that's what's picked up in the book of Hebrews chapter 9, where it says he didn't offer the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood. So this is a literal fulfillment of the old temple ritual. And so if you take the red line from the black blob and go up through the center lamp again and down again, that's the servant. And then the mirror image here is that he is the offering. He is the thing that is brought near. So the servant makes himself an offering for sin. Different word is used in Isaiah here. This is one of the things you often find with the reading of the lead books. I don't know if this was a strategy to keep the lead book reading secret, but you very often find a verse that is clearly present in a prophetic oracle, Micah, Isaiah, for example, and yet the words used are synonyms. It's almost as though they didn't want to reveal the actual word in the oracle. And that happens so often. I've reached a stage now where I want to go back and re-examine a lot of the readings to see if this is in fact universal. This was a way of hiding what was their immediate inspiration, and then they put it forth in words that had the same meaning. And then, of course, the famous line in Hebrews 9, not the blood of goats and calves, but his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption. Now, the next one, the servant, is the red line going up to heaven and coming down again. But here, in reverse, you have the word for the cup or the lamp of the menorah. So here we're reading the red line up, and then we're reading it back in reverse on itself. So here he is functioning as part of the menorah. You remember in the book of Revelation, the angel, John has to give a word of warning to the angel of one of the churches: mend your ways, or your cup or your lamp or your branch will be removed. So the idea that your branch was cut off was a very real threat. If you look at the blue line, the mirror image, you have that he was wounded or afflicted. Well, that is a very important theme in Isaiah chapter 53. Again, using synonyms. If you use it in reverse, you have the word for Eden or delight. And in the servant song, of course, after his suffering, the servant achieves satisfaction, and he sees the fruit of his suffering. And I can't remember the exact words that are familiar in English, but you have from the servant song, Isaiah 53, stricken for the transgression of my people. And then the lamp image, a dimly burning wick, he will not be put out. Now, most English translations say a dimly burning wick, he will not put out, as though he is going to be doing the extinguishing. But it just needs a change of vowels. And remember, the vowels aren't in the original text. Here you have the image of the dimly burning wick who will not be put out. And then the previous line, of course, is that he is the branch, the bruised branch of the menorah, and he will not be broken off. That word translated, bruised reed, kana, is actually the branch of the menorah. So the picture of the servant as a branch of the menorah is all through these songs. And then you have the river of your delights, or the river of your Edens. That's from Psalm 36, just a picture of paradise. Now, we've now got up into heaven, and we see the servant up there, the red line starting top right, that's the word servant again. Now, there are so many different ways of writing servant. because there are so many examples on this page of the first letter, the ayin. Now, the ayin in this script is that O shape, little circle. There are 6 of them, which means there are 6 possible ways of writing the word servant. And each one of those ways, well, there's more than 6, in fact, because there's several examples of the last letter, the D. But there are many, many ways of writing servant, and they all have significant mirror images, which is quite extraordinary. So here you have the servant up in the highest heaven, and the mirror image here is that he is also exalted or high. And the opening line of the great suffering servant song, which as it happens is at the end of Isaiah 52, the chapter divisions are in an unfortunate place at that point. It begins by saying, my servant shall be exalted and lifted up and shall be very high. And that's those exact words. So this is the servant when he goes up to heaven and he's transformed and he comes back and he's no longer just human. Now, at the bottom, the red box, now these 6 letters tell us many things about the state of the earth. If you read the red box from the black circle, so you're reading it from left to right, what you're doing here is something you often find in these books. You'll read one set of letters and then you will go back and perhaps read 2 of that little set of letters as the 2 first letters of the next word, and maybe you'll repeat it again, so you get a lot of overlapping words. Now, if you look at the Roman equivalents that I've put in the first line, you've got N, and then you've got the comma, you've got the aleph, and then you've got the S. And then remember that aleph can also be a Y. And so the next word starts using both those letters, the comma and the Y, and a different form of the S. You see the S in the first word is the S that's got the dot underneath it, so it's a ts. And then the S in the second word has a little V over the top, so that's the sh. And then the third word uses the Y and the S from the previous word, but then uses the last word, which is the ayin, and that's the reversed kind of comma and thing. And so you get 3 substantial words out of this collection of 4. Now, this is a very, very common feature of reading the lead tablets. You can read a whole series of words and they're all kind of nesting in each other and growing out of each other. And sometimes you'll find both values of a double letter used together, and they can be used in either order. So if you have the Q and the R, you can be reading QR, or you can be reading RQ, or you can be reading a double Q. And so you can find words of quite considerable length out of a very few symbols. What is fascinating is that they are always absolutely consistent. Now, the red box from reading from the left says the despised man of salvation. Well, that again is straight out of Isaiah 53, despised and rejected, a man of sorrows. So we've got those words there. In reverse, you read it back from the other end, and again, you're reading overlapping words. It can be the ones who or the things that. There's no neuter in Hebrew. And then the word is either peaceful security or Zion. Because peaceful security, if you look, has the comma in the middle, and Zion has the Y in the middle, and we know that's the same sign, it's the Aleph sign. And so, despised man of salvation, and then the things that make for the peace of Jerusalem. And remember, Jesus is saying, would that Jerusalem knew the things that make for peace. Where does that come from? Now, coming down from heaven already, we've had the knowledge and we have had the garment of the high priest. And here you see the high priest's garment, and we shall look at this again later, actually originating up in heaven. That red line across is also the word bud. If you look at it, you'll find that where the red line and the green line meet, you've got something that looks like the Roman figure 9, that's the B. And then if you read the line to the right, you've got the right angle letter, that's the DG. If you move the green line down, you've got the same letter again, and those both are the word for the temple linen. Now that's another thing that you often find, words that spread out in both directions from a common point. And that's another of the patterns that you can look for in these incredibly sophisticated constructions. Now, this is an image that is going to be very important when we look at the bee lady in our third session today. If you take the red line, and this is the servant line, you take the red line down from heaven back to earth, you have the verb for gushing forth. And this is something that you find frequently said of the prophets, that they gush forth wisdom teachings. Now, wisdom teachings, you know, described as water, and the prophets, who are the spokespeople for wisdom, they are often said to gush forth the water of her spring. And this is particularly prominent when we are looking at the imagery associated with the bee tablet, which we're going to be doing later. Now, the servant gushes forth wisdom. You find this image particularly in the Qumran hymns. If you take the other part of that pattern and read the blue line from the triangle down to earth, then you have he judges. So he is the wise teacher, but he also comes as the judge. Well, again, this is a very familiar image of the Messiah coming as the teacher and the judge. And then at the bottom, we're back with those 4 letters that we've just been looking at. This time, they're divided differently. This is another characteristic of reading these texts, and that is the embedded boxes, where the words go in different directions. And so if you start with the purple box and read it from the triangle out to the left, you have the word for Zion, or it could be the flock of sheep. And if you read the green box to the right from the black circle, you've got salvation. And that is a very common motif in reading these patterns. You find that the lines that go from earth up to heaven are connected with the pattern, or take their origin in the pattern, which is about salvation coming forth from Zion. Now, there are several pairs of words that are titles for the Messiah. I'm going to show you just a couple, in fact, today for the reasons of constraints of time. I'm going to show you 2 words which both translate branch, semach. That H with a dot under it is like a Scottish CH. It's a rough H, semach. And this is the word for the branch that's used in Jeremiah. I will raise up for David a righteous branch. He shall reign as king. Well, we know he's a royal figure. He will deal wisely. Well, we know he's given wisdom. He will execute justice. Well, we know he's the judge. And righteousness in the land. And one of his names is Zadok, the righteous one. So that sums up quite a lot of the words that we've looked at already. Jeremiah 33 is almost the same. It's the same ideas. And samach is paired with knowledge. So here you have two examples of from the cluster of messianic titles that grow out of those two isolated letters either side of the stem. Now, the red cluster on the left grows out of the letter that is SH, and the blue cluster on the right grows out of the D letter. And those two, the sh and the d, are representing Shaddai, the great lady, the breasted lady. And there are a large number, a really large number of messianic titles and also information about the Day of Atonement that come from a triangle of letters on the left, those three that have joined with the red line, and then the one above that looks a bit like a Roman 9. All the various triangles that you can draw in that, and then their exact mirror images on the right. And between them, those two clusters of 4 letters yield up the titles of the Messiah and a whole lot of information about the Day of Atonement. And the bad news is I haven't got time to tell you that today. But if you look on the left, you have the branch or the dawn. The exact mirror image is knowledge or discernment, dahat. So Zechariah says, I will bring my servant, the branch. The man whose name is the branch shall grow up in his place, and he shall build the temple of the Lord. The returning Messiah, the returning Davidic king, was going to build the new temple. And this was also the Christian hope, or the hope in the time of Christian origins, that the Messiah figure would build the new temple. You find this in the book of Enoch, you find it in early Christian writings as well. Now, Semach also means the dawn. It literally means something that springs up. And this is how it's translated in the Old Greek, the Septuagint, and this is how it appears in the New Testament. And so in the Song of Zechariah, the familiar phrase, the day spring from on high has visited us, or the dawn from on high, Luke chapter 1, verse 78. But behind that, there is the idea of the branch. Now, the branch or the shoot could also be netzer. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, a branch shall grow out of his roots. And our word is the branch with the capital B. And in this, and in Greek, in New Testament Greek, this becomes, Jesus said, I am the root and the offspring of David, one of the many titles. One of the many titles that we find in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is steeped in words and images that are on this little tablet. So let's see how this is presented on the tablet. The red line from the black dot grows up, and it grows up from the earth, and the red line says the branch. And in reverse, what comes down is divine goodwill or favor. The exact mirror image, the blue line, what goes up is my witness, and what comes down is the one who knows. So this business of heavenly knowledge and what it is, the divine way of seeing things, very, very important for this tradition. Now, again, that pattern, the branch growing up from the earth brings salvation to Zion. And then you've got the blue blocks, salvation from Zion, very important part of the patterns. Now, if you take together the red line, which means the branch, And also the green line from the square at the bottom, that also going upwards, that means the suckling child or the young plant. And Isaiah 53 at the beginning, he grows up as a young plant in dry ground, or as the suckling child in Zion. And that green line originates in the middle of the word for Zion. If you look at the blue line, which is what we've just looked at, you have my witness, Isaiah 43, many other places. And the purple line, coming from the same place, is my playing child. And this is the child who later plays safely on the mouth of the adder's den at the end of Isaiah chapter 11. It's the same child. You can see from this cluster of letters all about the child, and they're all bound up with a snake as well, where Isaiah could have got his inspiration. Now, another word spelled the same way, so the same consonants, is the word notzer. And that S with a dot under it is the sade, the sound. And St. John imitated this sound in Greek when he described Jesus as the notzer, the King of the Jews. And that's the one that's usually translated Jesus of Nazareth. But if you look at John's Greek, the middle vowel is an omega and not an A. So what John is writing is Jesus the preserver, not Jesus the man from Nazareth. But you won't find that in any translation that I have come across. I would love to see one. So Jesus here is the preserver. He's the branch. All these word plays come through, but they're hidden because what we think of as a primary source, the Greek New Testament, in most cases is translating the thoughts of people who were still thinking in their mother tongue, which was the Semitic language. And so if we're honest, most New Testament Greek sources are actually secondary sources. The book of Revelation most certainly is. And so we've already lost a lot of the nuances by the time it has been put into Greek, because Greek is a very precise language. Hebrew is not precise, but it has a lovely richness of nuance because it can be so ambiguous. Now, the original Hebrew word for Christian is notzer. The Christians were the children of the woman clothed with the sun who was attacked by the dragon, the ancient serpent, and we know where he is. He's lurking at the bottom of the tablet. And the reason they were attacked is that they preserved the commandments of God. And what were they doing? They weren't just keeping the 10 commandments and being good. They were doing something else. And the question is what? Now, witness is another title for the Messiah, and his witness or his testimony was an important part of the royal tradition. The witness was what the king saw in heaven on his mystical ascent when he received the vision at his enthronement. And another thing we're told about the children of the woman clothed with the sun is that they have the testimony of Jesus. Jesus has revealed to them what he saw. And the beginning of the book of Revelation, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave to him, Jesus, to show his servants what must soon take place. Jesus saw something which he passed on to people called the servants. Are these the servants of the Lord or the servants of Jesus, or did they not distinguish? Very interesting to speculate. And then John himself, who is the person to whom the tradition was entrusted, he bore witness to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. So this heavenly vision and what is learned in this vision is a very important and much neglected element of early Christian thought. Now we're back to those groups of 3 letters on either side of the Shaddai letters, on either side of the menorah. If you look at the red line and read it in from the dot, you can either have anointed, or if you read the alternative forms of the double letters, it can be taken from the water, which is interesting, or it can be the word forehead. And we know when they were anointed, it was on the forehead. If you read it in reverse, it is the name. So what are we told there? He's taken up from the water and he's anointed on his forehead with the name. 3 letters going around in a triangle. Isn't that fascinating? And that's how this thing works. Now, the blue cluster, starting from the triangle, we have the witness, the testimony. In reverse, you have she will declare, it's the feminine form, or she will make known. She's going to reveal something to the one who is anointed. Just working around those clusters of 3 letters. And if you include in each case the 4th one that's just above each of those, then you get a vast area opening up. She will declare, she will make known. Now, he would come across the voice. We've mentioned her before. A voice came from heaven. You are my beloved son. With you I'm well pleased. A voice came out of the cloud. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. So this voice is recognizing and then pointing out her son. Now, the voice in the Old Testament is not recognized as the voice of a female character, because the Hebrew word for a voice, kol, is a masculine noun. So if you're writing correct Hebrew, you will say a voice spoke and we should translate it said. But we translate a voice spoke and he said, and everyone thinks, it's a male voice. But it wasn't. It was a female voice. The voice came from heaven and it said, you are my beloved son. A voice came out of the cloud and it said. And when you do that little shift, you recover an important element of this lost lady. Now, this is St. Jerome commenting on Isaiah chapter 11, verse 2. And this is, he is the, I think, the only source we have for this particular fragment of, in the gospel in Hebrew letters, he writes, I find this. When the Lord came up out of the water, the whole fount of the Holy Spirit descended and rested upon him and said to him, my son, in all the prophets I was waiting for you, that you should come and I might rest in you. And then a bit further down, when commenting on verse 9 of Isaiah 11, my mother, the Holy Spirit. So St. Jerome, around about 400 AD, he still knew this tradition of the mother as the Spirit. And notice here, my son, in all the prophets I was waiting for you. The mother speaks through the prophets, who are particularly her children. And there's lots of interesting wordplay. Again, I've got time to show you the detail. The word prophet is very similar to the word for, or the verb to prophesy is very similar to the verb for to gush out as a spring. It sounds similar, and when it's written, it looks similar. So knowledge from heaven was a very controversial matter, particularly by the people who emphasized that you had all you needed to know in the 10 Commandments. But the other tradition, the older tradition, perhaps one could say the more mystical tradition, emphasized something that was seen and acquired in the mystical ascent. By his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous. That's the obvious verse. And then John 3, he who comes from heaven is above all. He bears witness, that's that word, to what he has seen and heard, and yet no one receives his testimony. Recall when Jesus was speaking in the synagogue at Nazareth in Luke chapter 4, and he says, today these words are fulfilled in your hearing. He'd been reading Isaiah chapter 61, the beginning, and the whole of that portion presumably would have been the reading for that day. When he says, today the scriptures are fulfilled in your hearing, which means in effect that Jesus was proclaiming to be Melchizedek who had returned. People who knew him said, in effect, it can't be you. We've known you since you were a boy, and they drove him out. And it's the same thing. No one receives his testimony. But the other side of the argument is put by the pro-Moses people at the end of Deuteronomy and in many other places in Deuteronomy. Moses taught, this commandment which the Lord gives you this day is not in heaven, that you should say, who will go up for us to heaven and bring it to us, that we may hear it and do it. And you can't have it clearer than that. The people who emphasize the law of Moses and who were disproportionately influential on forming the canon, the Hebrew canon, they did not like the idea of knowledge given from heaven. And that's why you have to go into the non-canonical sources, into that vast area around the canonical sources, in order to find evidence for this older mystical tradition. And it's very, very clear you can sort it into two piles. Now, the Messiah was given the name. The king and the high priests were marked on the forehead when they were anointed. And the sign was the diagonal X shape, which was the old letter Tav. This indicated that they represented, or they were, the Lord. How they actually understood that is something I would love to know, but we've only got the evidence that we've got, and so we have to make do with what we have. Now, Ezekiel marked the faithful with this sign to protect them from the imminent destruction of Jerusalem. Put my mark on all those who are still faithful. And then, of course, at the end of the high priestly blessing, end of Numbers chapter 6, they shall put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. Now, there are lots of places, several places in the book of Revelation where people have the name on their foreheads, 144,000 of them in chapter 14. This doesn't mean that they've got the name of the Lord written in 4 letters across their foreheads. What it means is that they have been marked with a cross. And when the book of Revelation passes, of course, into Christian context, that was assumed to be 144,000 people who had been baptized. It wasn't originally that. Now, look what we've got in Revelation chapter 7. Do not harm the earth. So the judgment is coming. Do not harm the earth until we have sealed the servants of our God upon their foreheads, until we have marked them with the sign that will protect them. Do you remember the story of the Passover and marking a sign on the lintels of the door to protect them? And the Lamb, 144,000, his name and his Father's name, because heaven and earth were one at this point, and they've got this one name, the cross, written on their foreheads. Now, how should we translate that very well-known phrase, save us? That's what Hosanna means. It's not, despite Jesus Christ superstar, it's not all about leaping about. It's save us. Blessed is he who comes with the name of the Lord. Now, coming in the name of the Lord is implicit in that, but who comes with the name of the Lord conveys better what this is all about. And then, of course, blessed is the kingdom of our father David that is coming. It's associated with the royal Messiah. That's very important. Philippians chapter 2, which is an extract, or this bit is an extract from what is thought to be an early Christian hymn, and a very much misunderstood line in the New Testament. God has highly exalted him, Jesus, and bestowed on him the name which is above every other name, that, and then of course the hymn takes over, at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow, as Wesley put it. But the name that causes the creation to worship is not the name Jesus, it's the name of the Lord. And so God has highly exalted Jesus. He's raised him up like the servant, and he's given him the great name. And so when you have the acclamation and the affirmation in the New Testament, Jesus is Lord, it actually means Jesus is Yahweh. And that is something that comes as a huge surprise to a lot of people who've been saying Jesus is Lord and singing it for a very long time. There you go. Now, let's go back to those collection of 3 letters again, and this time starting with the red line again and the black dot, you have the word for a morning star or a seeker. And in reverse, it's someone who's purified with water, or if you put the vowels differently, someone who purifies with water. It can be either, so he's the morning star, it can also mean the seeker. If you have the blue line, that is the exact mirror image, and here you have to do what you have to do very often with clusters, you go round more than once. The blue line from the triangle, reading round 3 letters and then back to where you started, so making a 4-letter word, you get the word David. David as the morning star, royal titles, there they are. And in reverse, he will give thanks or he will make confession. So that's another cluster of messianic titles just in those 3 letters. Morning Star was a title for the Messiah, and it was also a way of designating a mighty angel. You see this in the poetry of Job 38. Remember, the lines are in parallel, and this is when this passage describes the creation, when the morning stars sang together and the sons of God, same thing, shouted for joy. So we know that a morning star is a son of God. When Jesus says, Revelation 22:16, I am the bright star of the morning, that's just putting into Greek what would have been more familiar in the Hebrew, I am the bright star of the morning. And then that letter in Revelation chapter 2, the promise to the faithful Christian, to the one who conquers. And then the English translation says, I will give the morning star. That's what the Greek says. But if you go back to the Hebrew, which clearly underlies the book of Revelation, bits might have been Aramaic, but I would vote for Hebrew most of the time. In Hebrew, the word forgive, Nathan, also means appoint. So to the one who conquers, I will appoint him as a morning star. The faithful Christian will become a son of God. And decoded, that makes perfect sense, what Paul was saying in Romans chapter 8, and Revelation says in rather more colorful language. So in temple ritual, the king was born as the morning star when he was anointed. Psalm 110, verse 3b, is just about unreadable in its present form. Whether that was deliberate corruption or whether it was just bad luck, I mean, who knows? What is important is that Psalm 110 and bits from it enjoy with Isaiah 53, the servant song, the distinction of being the most quoted blocks of text in the New Testament. So they were clearly very important. And at the heart of Psalm 110 is a description of how the Melchizedek figure is born. I have begotten you with dew, that was a common name for the anointing oil, from the womb as the morning star. The womb was a name for the Holy of Holies and also for the Lady of the Temple. Now, this text has been damaged in transmission, and what I've done there is reconstructed it from Old Greek and also from some rather curious texts that have survived from Ugarit. You could argue against just about every word I suggest. That's how scholars work. But there is actually a justification for everything that I have done. And that is nearer to making sense of the Hebrew than anything you find in proper translations. Your youth will come to you. I mean, that sounds like a cosmetic advert, doesn't it? But in fact, that's not what this is about. Now, the morning star was Venus. And in Hebrew tradition, this was the sign of the crown prince. It was not a female, it was a male. And the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, the famous Isaiah 7 prophecy, was prompted by the planet Venus passing through the sign of Virgo when the sun was in Virgo. This was visible in Jerusalem at dawn in late September 731 BCE, and this, for other reasons, is believed to be the date of Isaiah's prophecy. I had the huge privilege of consulting the person who was then the paleoastronomer at Cambridge University, and I gave him those details, and he had all this stuff in his computer. And I said to him, can you find me a time when the planet Venus was in this constellation, etc., etc., and you could view it in the early morning looking east from Jerusalem. And he sat there to my amazement, and I saw the ancient skies whiz before me on his computer screen. And he said, oh yes, he said, September 731. And I thought, wow. So I thanked him. That was fascinating to discover. That's one of those lovely kind of memorable moments. Now, David is the mirror word of Morning Star. David may have been just a title, beloved, rather than a name. But look what we've got in Psalm 89, verse 20, again, a very familiar line. I have found David, my servant, with my holy oil, I have anointed him. And then Jeremiah 23, which we've looked at already, but a different emphasis this time. I will raise up for David or as David. That Hebrew can be either. I will raise up as a new David, a righteous branch. He shall reign as king and deal wisely and execute justice and righteousness in the land. Upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it. These lines are so familiar. And then Gabriel's words to Mary, the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David. Palm Sunday, save us. Blessed is he who comes with the name of the Lord. Blessed is the kingdom of our father David that is coming. And then back to Revelation. I am the root and offspring of David, the bright morning star, exactly what we've got on this tablet. Now, Yahoo, as I've already mentioned, was an ancient form of the name represented by the cross. And here I've given you two patterns. They are, in fact, different ways of joining the same letters. And both patterns intersect at the central lamp. Both patterns make the sign of the name, the X. The left-hand side, the red line from the dot gives you Yahoo. The blue line from the triangle gives you my mark. In the right hand, the red line from the dot gives you Yahoo. And the blue line from the triangle gives you a verbal form of the same root. He sets a mark. But that actually makes the mark of which it speaks. So this is another example of the letters themselves showing what they are speaking about. So the royal man ascends from earth through the Holy of Holies to heaven. And the red line tells you that he is the servant. He serves, it's a verbal form. And the blue line going up is another way of writing the name, just the 3 yods. And that tells you that Yahweh is present in the servant. Then the ascending lines in heaven reach the first, that is the black circle, and the last, that is the triangle, letters of the alphabet. And in Revelation, we have I am the first and the last, also in Isaiah 44. Sometimes you put this into Greek, I'm the Alpha and the Omega, but in the Hebrew equivalent would have been the Aleph and the Tav. But then there they are up in heaven. Now, if we look at the purple line at the bottom here, we have the man, or it can be fire. And in reverse, it's majesty. So we've got the royal man here. We've looked at his path up to heaven. That was the previous slide. But the green line, which is his halfway house, if you read it across from the triangle, you get the word precious one or splendor. If you read it from the other side, from the left, it says the one who is called or named, or the one who sees. Now, here we're getting to something a little bit more complicated. The red line, and you can read this either way, that is the word for the sign of the name. The blue line reading from the dot, that says the name. If you read it in the other direction, it's the one who suckles. And we know the Messiah did that. Rejoice with Jerusalem, that you may suck, you may drink deeply with delight. And the green line, starting with the blob on the left, the living one. And in reverse, it says Yah, a form of the name. So what we have in that, if you like, 6-pointed star, all intersecting at the central lamp, is the seal of the living God. And it was this elaborate sign that was the sign of the presence of the Lord in the person who wore it. If you join all that, and we're going to do this later in another context, you will find you have the star, and the star is over the tree, which is the menorah. And Adam saw that star in Eden, according to the revelation to the Magi, which we looked at yesterday. This is what was set on the forehead of the Messiah. And so this little tablet reveals the star on the beam of light. And some of you may remember where the cave was. And the answer is that this is exactly what the revelation of the Magi is talking about. And then if you read some of the other possible lines around that star, if you have the red line from the blob at the top, that means integrity or the perfect one. Both cases, it's the feminine forms. And in the blue line, you have Eshet, the woman of. So this star is a sign of the woman of integrity or the perfect one. We know who she is. And then you've got 2 nesting patterns there. The red line says seal, and the blue line says the abyss or the primeval ocean, the Tehom. And this was a sign of the power that the Messiah had. First of all, there was darkness on the face of the abyss. And then from the prayer of Manasseh, which is a little tiny text that's included in the Apocrypha, O Lord Almighty, you have confined the deep, the abyss, sealed it with your terrible and glorious name. They believed that it was the sign of the presence of the Lord, the cross, that actually subdued the powers of chaos. And then two more nesting patterns. The red line is setting or exaltation. And so Psalm 89 again, I have set the crown on one who is mighty. I have exalted one chosen from the people. There are the words in parallel. The blue line from the same pattern, sound wisdom. My son keeps sound wisdom. Isaiah again, the Lord is wonderful in counsel and excellent in sound wisdom. And so the Messiah is set in the middle of the star shape that describes his anointing. The Lady of Perfection gives him the seal that secures the creation and confines the power of the waters. She exalts him and she gives him sound wisdom. You remember the disciples' question after Jesus calms the storm on Galilee and calms the raging waters, who is this that the winds and the waves obey him? Well, that's what this is about. And then Ezekiel 28, you were the seal of the pattern. This is this cherub in Eden, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. I placed you as the anointed guardian cherub on the holy mountain of God. This is the Adam figure in his angel state, and he abuses his wisdom for the sake of profit and trade and all the rest of it. And so he gets thrown out. It's a terrifying picture. I threw you out and you were consumed to ashes. And, you know, everyone was amazed at what they saw. Now, this is the last one. Really, this is going on. Sorry. The human Messiah brings the name to earth. And here you have an extraordinary pattern where name, that's the between the at either end of the horizontal lines, if you join them to each of the bottom letters in turn, you get something about the Messiah. Here you have the first three letters. The red line says my name. The blue line says oil, and the green line says yoked or joined together. And the name at the top links down to the letters that say Yonake, the suckling, the little child, the little plant. Completing that pattern, you have the name again, and here it goes down and roots itself in the purple box. And there it is the suckling who delights, the child who plays, of course, on the adder's den. And the red line here means the suckling. The blue line means he has been cleansed. And the green line means he is the ruler or the teacher of parables, wisdom teaching. So there you've got 6 descriptions of the Messiah who brings the name, and he comes as the child. And then the text that clearly run from this, the whole earth is full of his glory. I and the Father are one. And then in him, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. There you are. Sorry, that went on rather longer than I had planned, but there's an awful lot about the Messiah, and there is, you know, we could be here for the rest of the day, but that's just a little bit of what you can glean from those extraordinary letter patterns on the page. And when we come back, let's compromise with the time and come back after 25 minutes. So let's come back at 25:02. Otherwise, we're going to get a bit off schedule. We come back at 25:02 and we'll look at the mother of the Messiah. And there's a lot about her as well. But the same letters read around differently, read around from the blue line by the square box. That is flowing down. And so the lady, in some way, the queen, flows down. Now remember that teaching and reign are the same word in Hebrew. Then here you have a previous pattern just in black, and Shaddai geminates as she flows down into the earth. So if you read the red line there, follow it down, that says Shaddai. If you read the blue line and follow it down, that says flowing down. And then, using the same triangle of letters, Shaddai geminates as she flows to the earth. The red line here, starting from the black circle, that says, I shall flow or pour out. And the blue line says queen again. So you have got, if you like, a double gemination, all about Shaddai flowing, or the queen flowing from heaven into the Holy of Holies and then out again onto the earth. And so she's a double gemination. The red triangle, if you read round both the meanings, Shaddai flows or pours out, and the blue triangle, the queen, flows down. So the message there is fairly clear. Something is coming from heaven through the Holy of Holies and out into the earth. And then whatever it is that flows from heaven to the earth, look what it flows onto. This is the purple box that we met before. The purple box reading outwards from the middle, that says the suckling or the little plant. He's the servant who grows up in Zion, or the dry land. Again, it's the same word. And then the green box reading out from the middle, that's the delighting suckling again. So it's the child, it's the servant, and he is watered, or whatever it is that's flowing, that's symbolized by that water, geminated form, and it comes down to the recipient on earth. That's a lovely picture of what I suppose you would technically call the procession of the Spirit, how the Spirit comes to earth. But here is the important lady, and she is a double gemination, and finally she gets to earth. Now, here you have the red line coming up from the earth, that's Shaddai. Look what we've got, the blue line. The blue line, we have the bottom letter can be the Aleph or the Yod. And so reading that up from the bottom, it can either be pleasing or upright or straight, or it can mean going forward or declaring blessed or happy. Wisdom texts often begin with an exclamation formed from these words. The Psalter actually begins with the word Ashrei, happy are, blessed is the man who, the first line of the Psalter. And almost certainly the Beatitudes, when originally spoken, would have been Ashrei, blessed are. And then you have this wonderful collection of Jesus's teaching in the form of wisdom teaching. That's a huge giveaway. And then if you change the R to the Q, remember it's a double letter, you have pouring out water or oil or the Spirit or flowing, there it is again. Or it can be Yatsar, and then it's shaping or planning. Now, the words that I've underlined there, pleasing, upright, going straight, going forward, declaring blessed or happy, these are the root of the name Ashrata, which is one of the names or perhaps the titles of the lady. One of the things she did was to point the way or to show you the right path. And it's interesting how one of the great icon types the Greek title there just means the lady who shows the way. And here you can see she's pointing to the child. He is the way. This is a Russian icon, quite an old one. I don't know how they date these things, but the book I read said before the 14th century, and I accept that. Now, other icon types are also rooted in titles for the lady. One of the titles for the lady was the Compassionate One, and another very well-known icon style where Mary is cuddling the baby up next to her cheek. That is also known as the Compassionate Mother. So these great titles for the mother of the Messiah passed, and goodness knows who passed it down, presumably just ordinary congregations of people who got overlooked by the publishers of canonical texts, as so often happens. And then suddenly, there they are, the great icons of the Eastern Church. Now, here we are, Ashratar, the lady who shows the way, the red line going round. I've shown you this before, that's Ashratar. The blue line going round from the triangle. Wait a minute, I've got this. That triangle's in the wrong place. That triangle should be the other side, and it should be starting top left. That says the dove of Yahweh. And we know, of course, the Spirit descending like a dove, and the voice from heaven saying, that voice should have a capital V, really, shouldn't it? Now we know who she is. You are my beloved Son. Now, the lady who shows the way, the red line here from the black circle, that says Ashratar. The blue line reading around twice. Now, this is something you're going to have to get used to. Reading round shapes twice actually means the woman who establishes statutes. She gives the law. She teaches all sorts of things like that. So this is Ashratar. Now, this is one I loved finding this one. I couldn't believe this one actually worked. But I think it looks like a crown. I don't suppose for one moment it was intended to look like a crown, but that's how I imagine it. If you read these 4 triangles, all based on the letters for Shaddai, and you start each of the triangles with the black blob, the red line says flourish. The green line says be exalted. So that's one aspect of her. The blue line says destroy. It's one of the meanings of Shaddai is the destroyer. And the purple line is driving mad. And one of the punishments of Shaddai, if you flouted her or ignored her or whatever, was that she let you live with what you had chosen. And that ended up with madness. Hosea, the earliest writing prophet, the days of punishment have come. The prophet is a fool. The man of the Spirit is mad because of your great iniquity. Who has turned the prophets into fools and spiritual men into madmen? Answer the great lady, because you have done something against her. And that's Hosea. Hosea is the earliest writing prophet. Now, the lady appears on earth. Now, this is another series, rather like the series I showed you of the Messiah, where you have, in his case, it was the line across that means the name, and then coming down to all the letters in earth in sequence. And here, the lady appearing on earth, these patterns depend upon the line which I have put in orange. And if you read it from the black circle, it can say seeing or perception, or if you different vowels, it can mean a mirror. Reading the other way on, it can mean a light, or it can mean a stream, or it could also mean honor or respect. But there's something about this pattern which suggests that we are seeing in the lady a reflection of something that is above us, you know, beyond the Holy of Holies and up in heaven. But this is how it works. First of all, the wisdom of Solomon, which is, of course, in the Apocrypha. Wisdom is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, an image of his goodness. So this is represented by that orange line across. She is the mirror, the image of the goodness. And when we see wisdom at work, we see that to which she points. So here you have the first of the shapes that goes from the orange line and goes down to earth. And if you read that round anti-clockwise from the black dot, that can mean a protective wall or a tower or a wall. If you read it round the other way, it can mean honor or respect. One of the interesting things about Jerusalem, and we should be looking at Jerusalem tomorrow, first of all, that Jerusalem is considered to be the female, the bride, the wife of the Lamb. Second, this huge emphasis on the high walls, the great high wall, Revelation chapter 21, verses 9 and 12. The walls of Jerusalem are very, very important. And the lady herself, in some way, is those protective walls. There's another picture of them we shall see later. Now, looking at the triangle that goes down to the second letter, reading that around, either a lamp, or if you read it round the other way, it's pure or innocent. And again, lines from the wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom is a pure emanation of the glory of the Almighty, a reflection of eternal light. So that's the second of the triangles coming down from the orange line. The third one, again, starting at the bottom, if you read round anti-clockwise, it says a stream, or in reverse, it says the lion. Now, stream, we've seen plenty of that, the lady flowing down from heaven and so forth. But the image of a lion was a very important image for the Lady of the Temple. Ezekiel chapter 19 has a marvelous poem about the mother lion and her lion cubs, again using a different word for lion. And the lion cubs are the kings of Jerusalem. And he begins by addressing the kings of Jerusalem, who were a bit of a bad lot in his time. What a lioness was your mother. Wonderful picture. You could imagine this fierce woman with her sons. Now, the kings in question had different actual mothers. They were from kings' different wives. So this is the heavenly mother, and she's the lioness anyway. Now, the next one, the orange line again, anti-clockwise from the bottom. Here you have, she's either the song or, reading round the other way, she is the princess. And for the first one, the old Greek of Proverbs 8, wisdom holds all things in harmony. She's the music. Or she's the princess, wisdom of Solomon, give me the wisdom who shares your throne. There she is. Then the purple line. Now the purple line again going round, this time starting at the top with the circle. She can be the beloved woman, or going round the other way, she can be the honeycomb, the wood, or the thicket. Now, that is an important link to what we're going to be looking at next, because this will be a picture of the bee lady, wisdom, and she is in exile, and we found that her honeycomb is in a thicket somewhere. And then the last word you can read around from this is the female protector. And then the last of them, well, wisdom, my inheritance is sweeter than the honeycomb. And then the protector, the virgin daughter of Zion, says, because you have raged against me, I will turn you back. That's the famous oracle. She scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. Now, this is the last of the sequence of 6, the dark blue line, clockwise, the mirror of God, or in reverse, the sound of a stream. And of course, that was the sound of many waters. That was the sound of the voice of Shaddai. And again, reading round clockwise, the God who sees. And back to the wisdom of Solomon. Wisdom is a spotless mirror of the working of God. And Ezekiel, the sound of many waters, like the sound of Shaddai. So looking at all those extraordinary patterns, all dependent upon this one line, which is the line that is the light and the mirror and all the rest of it, we know that the mother of the Messiah is the protecting wall, the pure lamp, the song, the princess, the beloved, the honeycomb, the protector, the mirror, sound of many waters, and the one who sees. And that's all there in that collection of triangles. Wisdom, Book of Wisdom, chapter 8, verse 1, she reaches mightily from one end of the earth to the other, which of course is what she's doing. Those bottom letters represent the earth. She reaches mightily from one end of the earth to the other, and she orders all things well. Now, this is the only bit of the geometry that I'm going to introduce to you during this week. There is a huge amount of very precisely drawn geometry in this tablet. Hexagons, quadrilaterals, triangles. There's the golden triangle, there's the tetractys triangle, all sorts of things here, but we could spend a very long time on that, and it's better, I think, not to attempt to rush it. The lady was associated with the pentagon, five-sided figure. This is not a regular pentagon, and there's reasons for this. It's formed from 5 triangles, and the 5 equilateral triangles that form the lowest part of the pentagon actually meet. Their apex is at the central lamp, if you can imagine that drawn across. So they all meet at the Messiah. The equilateral triangles that form the upper part of this pentagon, the 2 of them, they meet at the first node of the menorah. And again, this is something I can't embark on with you. Each of the nodes where the branches cut the stem of the menorah, each of those has a significance, and patterns that intersect at those nodes have a particular pattern of significance. So there's a lot of geometry in this. But what I've done, I've taken a hymn from one of those texts that was found in Egypt at Nag Hammadi, labeled Gnostic, but they didn't give themselves that label. They thought that they were Christians, and they considered themselves the descendants of Seth, the great high priest. Seth, who was his family apparently driven out because Isaiah described the replacements in the temple as people with the same name but different vowels. He says the temple will be full of thorns, and thorns is written in the same way as Seth but pronounced differently. Anyway, this is one of the hymns. The reference at the bottom, NHC, just stands for Nag Hammadi Corpus, and it's section 7, 520, if any of you want to go and look for it. This is what it says. You who made the shining ones. Now, shining, that's my replacement for male ones. You who made the shining ones. You who truly are shining threefold, not you who are a triple man. You were divided into 5. You were given to us in threefold power. You were generated without birth. You came from the upper state, heaven, entered the middle, the Holy of Holies, for the sake of the lower. Now, that is a curious illustration. The lady is a fivefold being, and she comes from the top part of the tablet. She enters the middle for the sake of the bottom part. So there's the lady's pentagon. Now I'll show you just one or two things that can be done with the pentagon. I'll show you more of these tomorrow when we're looking at the city of Jerusalem. If you look at the red line, we've come across this in another context. This is the Queen, Shegal. And then we've had the flowing and the appearing. We've had that already. But that forms the central triangle of this pentagon, which is very important for the lady. Now, these are some of the triangles that show the gifts of the lady. This can get very complicated to show because they start kind of obstructing each other. But the green line from the black dot, that is rain given as showers of blessing or withheld as a punishment. So power over the rain was part of the lady. And if you read that in reverse, it just says the stronghold. If you read the orange line, you can read that in both ways, because if you look at both ends of the orange line, you've got the same letter, the one that looks like a W, and that's actually the triple S. That orange line in both ways, that says the sun. And if you read the last words, the oracle, the last words of King David, he rules in the fear of God like the sun and like the rain. So the lady's gifts are rain and sunshine. More things that come out of this pentagon. The lady rules with her son, and then the red line again is the word for queen, and the blue line anti-clockwise again is the queen. But look what happens. The green and purple lines here both say the ruler or the teacher of wise sayings, the Moshe. So she and her son are inextricably bound together. There's a lot more of this when we look at the patterns that represent Jerusalem. Now, let's come on to something else. Top left here is something, a decoration on a pot known as the Lakish Ewer, and dated about 1200 BC. Found in 1934, about 25 miles southwest of Jerusalem. And in that red box at the top are three letters, and you read them from left to right. And the letter on the left corresponds to the letter on the right hand, in the right-hand circle of our little tablet. The letter in the middle on the pot corresponds to the two L letters in the center of the line, and the letter on the right on the pot, the cross, corresponds to what is clearly a slightly wobbly cross on the left-hand side. So the writing on the Lakish Ewer is read from left to right. Our tablet you read from right to left, but the important thing is that you have the name Alet, goddess or shining one, over a tree with 6 branches and a central stem. That's obviously some sort of primitive representation of the menorah. And you have the menorah with the lady above it, the tree with the lady above it, long before the Hebrews enter Jerusalem. Now, go forward many, many centuries. And what you see, an illuminated Christian codex, Byzantine treasure, alas, destroyed in a fire in 1922. you see Mary and her son enthroned over a menorah that is clearly also a tree. That is a very ancient image. It's the same image as we have on the tablet, same as on the Lake Yeshua. Then, leaping forward to 1917, this is one of these souvenir cards from Fatima. And this is something that I haven't seen commented on. I did a bit of research on this and didn't actually find anything at all. But the peasant children who saw these apparitions described the lady, and she was in a cloud over a home oak tree. And so they reproduced what the children said they saw. And there you have the lady in her cloud over a tree. Now that's extraordinary that that image has recurred right through over 3,000 years. Now the lady is there over her tree. Now, the lady's tree was taken from the temple many times and destroyed. As we know, the final destruction was by Josiah in 623, 2 Kings 23. Josiah brought the Asherah from the house of the Lord outside Jerusalem to the brook Kidron and burned it at the brook Kidron. St. John saw it restored to the Holy of Holies. And this is the last chapter of Revelation. So this, in effect, is the happy ending of the Christian Bible. The lady is back where she belongs. So we have the angel showed me the tree of life with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. The leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Now, Enoch saw this banished tree in his vision. And this is from the earlier part of the book of Enoch. This high mountain which you see with a summit like the throne of God, notice that, is indeed the throne upon which the great and holy one, the Lord of glory, the eternal King, will sit when he descends to visit the earth with goodness. And part of the same vision, as for this fragrant tree, no flesh has authority to touch it until the great judgment, when he takes vengeance on all and brings everything to eternal consummation. Then it will be given to the righteous and holy ones, and from its fruit life will be given to the chosen ones, and it will be transplanted towards the north. Now, that is a contested translation, but I'm very happy with it. Transplanted towards the north to a holy place, to the temple of the Lord, the eternal King. So wherever this tree has gone, in order to return it to the temple, you have to move it north. In other words, the tree has gone south. Now, when the tree returns, the Lord appears, and this is the famous lozenge, the red line moving round, the transplanted one, and it's feminine. The blue line reading round clockwise can either mean praise the Lord, hallelujah, as we know it, or it can be read, you, feminine, cause the Lord to shine, because of the double letters. Now, the lady was also the lady in the tower. The Holy of Holies, which is where the lady was, remember, God's temple in heaven was opened, the ark was seen, and there was the woman clothed with the sun about to give birth. So she's in the Holy of Holies. And the Holy of Holies was often called the tower. It was the Migdal in the vineyard. And that tower in the vineyard, Isaiah, was the Holy of Holies. And that's where the lady lived. Now, Habakkuk, remember Habakkuk was one of Isaiah's group of prophets, Isaiah, Micah, Joel, Habakkuk. He stood in the tower, another word for the same thing, and he stood there to wait for a vision. So he was waiting to see what the Lord would show him. Now, does that mean he was looking at something, one of our lead tablets, or was he just sort of standing out, looking and wondering what the Lord would show him? The Lord said, write the vision, write it, make it plain upon the tablets, so that he who runs may read. Now, that is a most extraordinary thing. What on earth does it mean? So that he who runs may read Habakkuk chapter 2. Runs in Hebrew is spelt, again, I'll Romanize the letters, Y-R-W-S. Cast metal is Y-S-W-R. All you have to do, the W is the vowel, you have to flip the last two consonants. Instead of R-S, you have S-R. I suspect that what this said originally was, write the vision, make it plain upon the tablets, so that he who casts the metal may read it. That makes a lot more sense. So if you have here the red line and you read it round from the black dot, that says either, and these are feminine forms, the one who exalts, or the one who is exalted, or, reading it from that word for tower, the lady of the tower. Now here, the lady of the tower's mirror image is this word for seven, or seven and then sevenfold knowledge. And the prophecy prediction in Enoch, the chosen righteous ones will receive sevenfold knowledge. This is linked to, sevenfold knowledge is linked to the lady of the tower. And who is the lady of the tower? Well, there are many statues of this so-called Lady of the Window that have been found in Syria-Palestine region. She was probably the lady of the temple, not just the Jerusalem temple, but other temples, looking down from her tower. There she is, she's a very grand lady. Remember Jezebel, the queen, looks down from her tower and paints her eyes and fixes her hair, and they come in and get her anyway. But I think she was probably being reminded them that she was the lady of the tower. Now, this could be the one who exalts or the one who is exalted. And this is the title Magdalene. Now, who was Mary Magdalene? That's the question I will leave you with. She's a lady of the tower, and there's a swathe of early Christian memory tradition, largely in Syriac, which remembers Mary Magdalene as a title of honor given to Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary of Nazareth. And it was only in later confusion and all sorts of other things that she becomes geminated as two separate women, but certainly she was originally remembered as a title of honor for Mary of Nazareth. And that gives us lots to think about and lots of new ways to read the New Testament, the Lady of the Tower. So now we'll have an hour's break, and we'll close this meeting and reopen it in 50 minutes' time for our evening session.